I would like to remind anyone that if they're interested in going down to that, the staff captain has opened it up for us, so you are more than welcome to head down and take in the views from the open deck there. On the other side of the ship though, our starboard side, this landmass that we see here is in fact Resolution Island. It's actually the 7th largest island in all of New Zealand, and it was of course named after Captain Cook's ship, the Resolution. The whole island itself covers over 200 square kilometres of land and is completely uninhabited from humans. I say humans because it was chosen in 2004 to be one of New Zealand's offshore reserves. Another one of those locations where they have got rid of all introduced species. Common species that have been introduced that are absolute pests to the native wildlife are creatures known as stoats, which look fairly similar to weasels or ferrets if you are not familiar with what a stoat is. They were brought out here in the early 1900s. But another problem species that New Zealand is doing its best to clear them from are possums. So Resolution Island has been completely cleared of all invasive species. It's not the first time they've tried to do this, but they have been successful this time. And so all of the local wildlife, we've got kakapos out there, kiwis as well, they've all been able to have safe haven here on Resolution Island. I mentioned it briefly, but the survey that Captain Stokes was working on was so thorough and so accurate that many of his charts of this area were still in use hundreds of years later, up until the mid-1990s. And Acheron Passage is one of the areas he's most notably named after. So coming up to a stretch where it's just about half a mile wide, so quite narrow. But But just looking around, you can start to see the difference of how these areas were formed and created from the ice fields and the movement of the fault plains. Because compared with the steep-walled northern fjords, here in Dusky we've got the more curvaceous aspect, we've got lower mountains, and the glacial ice flowed over the top of them here, leaving more blunt-ridged peninsulas. We've also got thicker forests. You can see the tree line is lined more of trees rather than just shrubs and moss. And we still do get the occasional scarring, because whilst it is more gentle a slope, there's still very little soil on the landmass. First up, we've got Goose Cove, where they let loose some geese. Duck Cove is also here as well, and in Cook's words, it was where they shot 14 ducks. Now, Seal Rock, we had one in Milford Sound, there's one here in Dusky Sound as well. We'll be coming up, we'll be passing that, in my estimation, maybe about 25 minutes time. I'll point it out when we get closer. There's typically dozens of seals there, and if you're on deck 3, occasionally if the wind is down enough, you can even hear them if they're barking. But Seal Rock, of course, what are we going to find there? Fur seals, makes sense. And some of the last bits of land that we'll see here in the Bay of Dusky Sound are the Useless Islands. It's an unkind name Cook gave to them because he couldn't find any place to land. Now there are a couple of areas that I will be pointing out as well, but I may as well keep the dad jokes running. We've got Detention Cove, which was where Cook and his team got into on the Resolution, but they were actually detained because there was a lack of wind and they quite literally couldn't get out. Over those weeks, they made a couple of different attempts, but in the end, all were to no avail, and they quite literally just had to wait it out until the wind picked up and came in at the right direction. Maori tribes occasionally camped here in pre-European times, and the Maori name for the sound is Tamatea, after the legendary explorer who travelled the full length of the North and South Island in his canoe. Now, canoe in Maori language is called a waka. And his canoe was actually called the Taki Timu. And the tribes that lived here in Dusky Sound is known as the Ngati Iwi. They lived here in Dusky Sound as well as a couple of the other remote areas of the Fiordlands. Right here in Dusky Sound was where Captain Cook also met the lost tribe. It was right after they had fled from a massacre from a northern tribe, and they were thought to have disappeared completely. Some of them believe it's because after Captain Cook met with them, he'd given them gifts, and there was some conflict between the Maoris because of that. But more than likely it was just part of the cycle of life here in the southern island of New Zealand. The winters can be absolutely ferocious. Captain Cook, unfortunately, due to forms of miscommunication, more or less kidnapped a native Hawaiian, and you can imagine that the Hawaiians weren't too happy about that. And so he met his end on one of the islands of Hawaii. Fortunately, though, here in New Zealand, and hopefully so, the relationship with the Maori was quite peaceful.
Captain Milford?
Harbour was the base for Captain Cook and his crew. This is where they spent most of their time here in Dusky Sound, and they actually set up an observatory to get an accurate fix on their position, the first observatory in New Zealand. Now, large trees had to be cut down to make room for the observatory, and it took them about 6 weeks for them to establish the accurate longitude and latitude of where they were. And the tree stumps that they chopped down can still be seen at what's called Astronomer's Point. Now, because of the large amount of rainfall, the native trees here, they don't actually rot. So the tree stumps are still in the exact same state that they were hundreds of years ago when Captain Cook was here. Now, the artist accompanying Captain Cook, his name was William Hodges, and he actually he's got a painting of Pickersgill Harbour that is quite famous, and it shows a distinct tree trunk that's been used as a gangway for the ship the Resolution. In recent photos, that tree trunk can still be seen today. Whilst, no, it's no longer being used as a gangway, the tree trunk itself is still there in Pickersgill Harbour. Okay, my friends, this is where I need your help with anyone who's got a set of binoculars or eagle vision. The rock that's coming up is at about, our ship's 11 o'clock. You can see it standing alone there in the middle of the water. That's seal rock. And this is typically where we can see some seals. Now, I've mentioned depth perception a few times today. If we're able to spot any seals, just know that these animals are bigger than you or I. And we often see dozens there. But even though it might look like we get close and we can pass them, you'll occasionally hear them on the port side. We are still so far away that they look like ants to the naked eye. And in 1792, the first of the sealing ships arrived, Captain William Raven. He arrived on the vessel the Britannia. Now, they arrived and stayed long enough for a sealing gang to be dropped off here with all of their provisions, and that is where the unfortunate slaughter of the seals began. It took less than 30 years for the seals to be all but exterminated. One vessel alone in one trip took over 60,000 seal skins. But luckily today, that practice is no longer carried out, and the seal population is rebounding. And as I mentioned earlier today, the population of the Fiordland is thought to be a bit over 50,000. And it's just occurred to me, I forgot to mention one of the most important things about Dusky Sound. Remember when I was talking about Pickersgill Harbour? That was also the location of the first brewery in New Zealand. In fact, we got seafarers out here for months and months and months. Some stereotypes are true. Seafarers do like a good beer. And it was at Pickersgill Harbour where they set up the observatory, where they were there for weeks and months, that they actually created something similar to what Canadians know as spruce beer. So they gathered all the fronds from the trees and fermented them in a similar fashion to what they did when they were sailing through British Columbia, and created a form of beer that Captain Cook noted as being quite sweet. And so thus, Dusky Sound became the location for the first pub in New Zealand. Okay, to the north is an area called Luncheon Cove. And we can't see it exactly from where we are on the ship here. It takes a bit of winding through the islands. But I wanted to mention the story because I think it's absolutely fascinating. Luncheon Cove was an area that's really well protected from winds and was home to the main concentration of seals. And so on one of the sealing vessels that came out here, the first gang that came out consisted of 12 men, and they were under the charge of second mate William Lane. And they set up base at one of the islands here. The ship's carpenter was also left with them, and they were given enough supplies to build themselves an ocean-going vessel. All of these guys were from the ship the Britannia, and they wanted to have an ocean-going vessel just in case the Britannia didn't return. And imagine that, one home in case their mateship didn't return. Now, no doubt the carpenter was taken very good care of whilst he built the boat. And as a result, this area also lays claim to being the first Western house built in New Zealand. The house that they actually built here was quite a substantial one, 40 feet long, 18 feet wide, and had roofs as high as 15 feet. They thatched the roof with flax leaves. Now they did in fact stay productive and complete the vessel as well, and they kept it in a tiny inlet near the house. The vessel itself was also 53 feet long, so not a shabby little vessel there. Now luckily for the sealing gang, the Britannia did return after 10 months, but Captain Raven was not so impressed with the productivity of seal hunting, that is. He thought the house was great, the vessel was awesome, but they had only got 4,500 seal skins, so the boss wasn't happy. The Britannia soon sailed away, and they actually left the vessel there on its stocks where they built it. This ended up being a pretty good thing though, because in just about 2 years, this vessel played a life-saving role. There was a ship in Dusky Sound, the Endeavour, not Captain Cook's Endeavour, but an Endeavour that belonged to the East India Company. This is much later after Cook's time here. But the East Indian Endeavour sailed into Dusky Sound along with another accompanying ship called the Fancy. Now, the Endeavour was actually leaking really badly, and it looked like it wasn't going to be able to continue on with its journey. By absolute chance, one of the officers on board the Endeavour was actually a sailor on the Britannia years earlier. And so they actually dropped anchor about 3 miles away from where the vessel was located, and the captain took one of the officers to see if the sealer's vessel was there, and they actually found it in perfect condition. The captain of the Endeavour made the decision to strip the vessel, the Endeavour, of all her useful equipment and items, transfer them to this other vessel, and they managed to get everything important onto that ship. It wasn't too long after that an impressive storm came through and actually crashed the Endeavour up onto some of the rocks, sinking it completely, thus becoming New Zealand's first shipwreck as well.